Um, So as I say, thank you once again, Ping, for doing this. It really is appreciated. I know that there's not many people here today. In fact, there's nobody here today. So yeah, we might have to have a think about what we do for the future of these discussions. But I think it is worth going ahead, to be quite honest, Ping, because I think even you and I think it would be a good conversation to have. Even some of the discussions we've already had about this would be great. So I won't introduce you. I'll maybe let you introduce yourself. I'll do it briefly. Ping, you're a lecturer in architectural history. And
history, theory, criticism.
Cool.
For the first year students.
And at Singapore Tech just now, aren't you?
Yeah, Singapore Polytechnic.
Polytechnic. Yeah. Cool. Okay, I'll just hand it over to you. And do you want to just do your presentation or whatever?
Okay, I'll cool. Run through the slides.
Yeah,
okay,
go for it. Brilliant.
Let me do this again. Okay, you should be able to see the slides now.
Can indeed. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Cool. So I'll just give it a go now. Okay, thanks again for having me here. It's a fantastic privilege to be talking here. So, but I'm slightly embarrassed to say that my lecture can be quite long because there's some rabbit trails planted in it. So we should probably get started soon. So Singapore Poly is where I'm teaching at. So we are taking the name of the nation. We're the first polytechnic in Singapore. In fact, we offered the first architecture degree when the school opened in 1958. But and National University of Singapore came along, and then subsequently the program was then passed over to them. A little bit about myself to lay down the context of my research. So I teach the first year students who have graduated from a very STEM-based discipline of high schools. And if you have heard a little bit about Singapore's educational context, you know, our educational standings are pretty impressive. So you can probably sense that our first year students, they are highly anxious. They are also highly competitive. So I'm teaching history, theory, and criticism, where I also research, I tweet, and I write about the studio pedagogy in terms of formative reviews within architectural education. So there will be three main parts to this talk. The first part scrutinizes our pedagogical model, and we have really inherited it from the past traditions that hasn't really progressed much. And the second portion tries to understand the studio pedagogy relevancies and opportunities in preparing our students for a fast-changing nature of the workforce. And then the last one would be hopefully as a discussion that talks about this alternative non-hierarchical pedagogical model that seems to oscillate between the baggages of our traditions as well as to the future kind of uncertainties and the precarious work of the future to come. So design education always has its roots based in the job sites of the Medieval times as started off as a Master and Apprentice system. So this, in a very subtle way, this Master and Apprentice system, it started from the job sites and to the guild houses. And in the 1670s, the French government, in an attempt to standardize the French educational system, they've established the Académie Royale d'Architecture, which has developed methods of teaching of what today we kind of know it as the problem-based learning. And then the academy is then developed into the form of the Beaux-Arts alongside with the Polytechnic model. And then Bauhaus came along and replaced the workshops with a kind of workshop-based pedagogy. And as well, in the recent years, it starts to morph into the unit systems that is well advocated by AA. So, but the whole idea is that the French Beaux-Arts pedagogy is probably a good starting point to begin with, where the master and the apprentice relationship is thriving. So it's formalized in an academic setting of about 20-odd students. They worked in the ateliers, or rather the studios, away from the campus, in receiving the different ways of the trades that is trying to mimic the style and the design preferences of their masters, whom they're learning from. There are no formal curriculum of what they ought to be learning, or rather how they should learn. So both of this aspect is really depending on the personal preferences of the master. It's also worth mentioning that the authoritative power that's bestowed to the masters in determining the correctness of the apprentice work is well evident. So, but this pedagogy sets the stage for enculturation of behaviors and the different value systems. The divergence mode of design exploration would be deprived, especially when the master exerts their judgment and opinions and pedagogy in the Beaux-Arts. So it is all based on the master's instinct. So when they are in such an authoritative position, their position are seldom challenged within that paradigm. There's a book called Teaching Design, and the author is Davis. She has put no punches by saying that such pedagogical framework is often resulting to a cult of personalities where it is then worshipped by the students. I think this sounds pretty familiar. In these days, we call it the cult of the star architect. As the Bauhaus movement gained traction, the pedagogical spaces shift from the studios into the workshops, no longer declared as students, pupils, and teachers, but Walter Gropius in his manifesto said that now the term has been replaced with masters and apprentices. So here we see that the ghost of the Beaux-Arts is being resurrected from his grave, but some might argue that it has never died. Although architecturally Bauhaus emerges as another movement with a different learning environment, with a formalized curriculum, the means of engaging students and its teaching methods remains unchallenged. So in the Bauhaus studio, rather than to have one master hovering over the students, the Bauhaus workshop would have two masters. So in recent years, Professor Gabriela Goldschmidt has reported that when there are two tutors commenting on a student's work, the conversation will account for 62% to 74% of the studio time. So although all of us, we kind of acknowledge that the studio pedagogy is always have this ideas that is being student-centric, but nothing could be further from the truth. It is still pretty much very tutor-centric and is subjected to the master's inclinations. So the third hallmark of the studio pedagogy is the unit system that is made popular by architectural associations. But contrary from what we have always perceived to be, it is not Elvin Boyowski who has invented the unit system, but the Scottish planner Rose. So the main intention for him is to dismantle the siloed means of pedagogy, which the Beaux-Arts net framework in which AA is then currently subscribed to. So, so this person has introduced this unit system in favoring of student collaboration, using teamwork and group work as a pedagogical strategy, shifting into a more student-centric model. But its outcomes are largely disappointing. Speaking in the conference, Jeremy Teal has referenced Manfredo Tufuri's analogy of architects performing gymnastics in a confined prison yard. So where Jeremy Teal has likened that to students churning out gravity-defying schemes and breathtaking designs in a fairly restrictive environment in attempt to produce fresh designs. So the problem lies in when the designs are not fresh and not enticing enough, the tutors will have problems marketing their studios to the next cohort of students, and thus posing threats to their stable flow of income. So when employment of teaching in architecture school becomes precarious, the mode of engaging students becomes an affair of survival mode. But the history of architecture is always told through the history of the master designer and their associated styles, and of course their lineages. Along with the masters, they'll say that you do what I say and you say what I do. So when the apprentices takes on the role of the master, the styles and its value systems will faithfully reproduce. So our attitudes and methods to design can be influenced by these charismatic teachers, where they are passing down their wisdoms in which students are then producing portfolios of visual similarities through the tutor's design preferences and style. Through these models and stories, we might have generated a false assurance that being associated with the master designer, our chances of being successful is a notch higher. That is probably the case. So it's not about churning out good works, but then it is reduced to about making the right connections. So whatever disciplines that we might belong to, we should have a pretty rough idea of this figure, Miss Van der Rohe, who is a terribly iconic figure of the modern movement. So when the Bauhaus movement brought forward a new dawn in architectural thinking, the associated Bauhaus pedagogy or workshop is still unable to shake off the ghost of having that charismatic teacher within the Beaux-Arts pedagogy. So what is predicated on the influences of the master operating from the basis of mimicry and the adaptation of precedents into new situation, pretty much like what the Beaux-Arts is already doing. But within the influence of the modern movement, famously characterized by the rejection of historical references and ornament, Mies has often referred to his own set of aesthetical rules, using his own works as a set of precedents, applying on his future projects. Downright to his level of detail, his construction techniques and his expression remains pretty much identical. So perhaps this is one moment in which, in history, that has given birth to the notion of the star architect and its associated signature styles. So you would have believed me if I told you that the building in the middle is designed by Miss Van der Rohe, but in fact, this is a work by one of his students that is within the Miss Van der Rohe studio in Illinois. So the influence of the Master and Apprentice was pretty much well evident even in his teaching pedagogical practice. Frank Lloyd Wright, another iconic architecture figure, was also a firm believer of the Master and Apprentice, having trained in architecture offices himself, and he has developed this distaste for formal architecture education. The ironic thing is that he has set up his own school. So other than having a very lucrative business model for his school, apprentices will flock to him and they will need to farm, they will need to prepare meals, they will need to clean up the school. And when you graduate, you have no certificate. You probably just have a letter that's signed by Frank Lloyd Wright himself. So even the learning environment is highly hierarchical. You can't address him by his first name, but you have to call him Mr. Frank. So these are our Frank Lloyd Wrights of today. So, these architects, they are advocates, they are practitioners exploiting interns by making them work for free. And educators, we teach our students to look up towards them as role models. So if Frank Lloyd Wright is around today, these guys will be chilling around having a beer. So as much as the architecture field has progressed, certain norms and its value systems of exploitation, of self-exploitation, exchanging for a hope in finding employment for the future remains status quo. So such traits, and they are inculcated through the walls of academia, especially in the Master and Apprentice model where only a singular viewpoint is taken into account. So there are some possible ill effects of the one-on-one Master and Apprentice model. One of them, it will breed the students' over-dependence of their tutors in their work. So, but to a certain extent, if you were to take a step back, we can't really blame them, especially for first-year students, because their grades are at stake. So the students will blindly follow suggestions dispensed by their tutors in an attempt to please them. So at the end of the day, the scheme ends up like a Frankenstein. But I do suspect that even in contemporary settings, despite the stress of decreasing fundings and the increase of student-tutor ratio, we as educators, we pressed on with the one-on-one teaching format because, as wisdom has bestowed to us, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But the challenges of what is yet to come, we are still pretty much in an unknown state. So when I was researching about the one-on-one pedagogy, one of my supervisors has alerted me to this form of pedagogy known as folk pedagogy. So folk pedagogy is defined as being predicated on teaching based on intuition and often implicit theories on learning, and stories and design methods that's passed down like folk stories, stopping short of questioning the relevancies that whatever has been discussed, whether is it relevant in today's context of accelerated change. The second idea, which is pretty much in line with the Master and Apprentice one-on-one mode of teaching, is a kind of fallacy, which is appeal to authority. So especially when if we are dealing with students that's fresh from the STEM-based discipline where it's predicated on certainties, so they do tend to believe whatever advice that the design tutors will be giving them. And the students, they are facing a lot of struggles in making that transition from the certainties of the STEM disciplines into the uncertain nature of the design process. So let's take a closer look in terms of the studio operative framework. So it can be dissected into two main categories, the macro aspect and the micro aspect. So the macro aspect is pertaining to the design of the brief, as well as the allocation of the student groups and the method of sessions in the tutorials. And when we talk about the micro aspect, it shifts back to the conversational aspect of the studio. It is depending on how the tutor engages the student. So both of these gears, they are interdependent from one another. So a very quick rundown, this is the linear approach system, which is the unit system. So you have a cohort coming in and they have to go through a balloting system. So the motivation level and the studio size will have differences. So very limited moments of cross-pollination due to the individual studios. So I did a research in 2016 trying to find out the phenomenon of studio teaching and their experiences. So one students mentioned that it is in secrecy. If you do not get into your first choice, your motivation level tends to be not so good. But the micro aspect is really about the one-on-one. So there is a sign-up list, and then the students may hog the lectures up to 40 minutes, and then the less motivated students, they will disappear during midday. One of the student feedback is quite insightful. It is that it's very tough, if I could read off the comment, it's very tough for the students to get the tutor to have a discussion because the queue has started since morning, and the consultation sessions can take about 1 hour per student. So from the same 2016 research, so I've gathered findings from our school's graduate. So they kind of dispersed around the world. From 11 students. So I asked them what is the predominant pedagogical framework they have experienced in their respective universities. So we have the one-on-one desk grid, which is, which is the blanked one, unshaded ones. And then we have the pin-up grid, which is the crisscross hatching. And then finally, we have the group desk grid, which is the hatched in dots. So, but if you could look at the summary, it is that if I were to cluster the one-on-one desk grid together with the group pin-up, the kind of master and apprentice one-on-one engagement accounts for 84% of their time, and the group desk grid accounts for about 16%. So most of them, they are really on a slightly passive way of learning, where it is really predicated on siloed conversations. So to quickly wrap up the first part, this starts to expose certain dilemmas and questions. So in supporting the signature pedagogies of our design discipline, it is necessary to recruit tutors amongst practitioners. So that is, we have to do it. And here comes the double-edged sword. With little training, many tutors are teaching based on their instinct, which reminds us a little bit of the folk pedagogy. And the question is, how do we teach design? Our impartation of how to design is deeply embedded through our pedagogies, through a problem-based learning vehicle. The question is, can an alternative mode of pedagogy that shifts away from the master and apprentice as a non-hierarchical learning environment, where co-creation and decision-making is done and agreed on in a communal environment. So that also relieves the authoritative master's responsibility in determining the students' exploration to the communal student teams. So perhaps this is the reason that we stay in our comfort zone, is because we are not too sure of the benefits, as very, very little pedagogical experiments they are being carried out in the past few years. So the second part really projects to the future. We are living in a highly uncertain world. Perhaps in the recent months we have really felt it quite badly. So we are starting to witness the effects of the ongoing industrial revolution. They are rapidly changing the ways that we create value, we exchange value, and how we distribute value. Precarious work are becoming the norms, with the notion of the gig economy becoming even more relevant. And children entering primary school today, they are going to be in jobs that hasn't been invented yet. So perhaps the top 15 skills that's needed for 2025 is identified by a very recent report by the World Economic Forum, starts to identify what are the skills that is good for the students to have. So if you were to look at the list of 15 indicated by the red arrows, they are indicating desirable soft skills. So, but the next question is that, are we able to impart soft skills in a lecture setting? So unlikely so, because the premise over here is that the conversational studio pedagogy is often characterized by polemical discussions, and it enables students to reflect and to explain and to negotiate their design, can help to instill all of these desirable skills. There is a paper that's written by Thomas Dutton in 1987. He has written about the hidden curriculum in design pedagogy. So, but curiously, all of these ideas which he has really discussed is 33 years ago. And the studios of today hasn't really capitalized on the ideas of the hidden curriculum. And in future, design is expected to play a larger role. So we are no longer designing for autonomous object, but moving into systems, policies, and strategies. So the idea of design-led transdisciplinary practices are going to be more relevant in the future. And Professor Harold Harris has often talked about how architecture schools, our pedagogy that talks about the three-dimensional way of solving problems, can easily be exported into non-allied disciplines for the future. So Cedric Price was quite visionary. Even during his time, he has talked about the idea where the solutions to an architectural problem may not necessarily be a building. But it all boils down to collaboration. As the world becomes more complex, our problems becomes more complex. It is not about having that one heroic figure that solves the problems of the world. So, but how do we teach collaboration, and how do we teach teamwork? Even in schools, when we talk about teamwork, it is often boiled down to this divide and conquer way of strategy. So quickly moving on to the last part. So this is where these are some of the research that I've been trying to build on for the past 4 years that tries to wrap up some of the points that we have discussed in part 1 and part 2. So this is the context of the study, but it's based on the assumption that the student starts afresh because they're year 1 students. So it's a little bit like tabula rasa. But our students are a bunch of very anxious students, and it is also a result of helicopter parenting that is very prevalent in our Asian culture. But especially in our Singapore's context, our students are not accustomed to uncertainties. They are very reserved, and they are very, very non-confrontational. So they tend to take in whatever things that you are suggesting because they do not want to upset anybody. So these are 4 main key ideas that is driving the non-hierarchical pedagogical framework. So the first one is the learning environment. It is to build a trusting environment amongst the students. And then the whole system has to be conceptualized in a coherent way, which means it should be a cohort system sharing the same brief, the same progress and assessment. So that allows for the students to internally cross-pollinate with one another. So moments of cross-pollination can also be built into the mechanisms of the design brief, as well as the structure of the program. So it's also meant to be a framework that it is to facilitate knowledge acquisition that engages both the learners as well as the tutors. So a very broad picture of the framework, the students come together as a cohort separated into 3 different studios. So there will be one activity which is prelude studies that helps to get everybody on board. So that will help them to have a common theme for them to discuss with. So it helps in their discussions. So when they're breaking down into smaller groups for their studios, the ratio is still kept at 1:12. But within the 1:12, they can break themselves into smaller groups so that they are more comfortable with one another. It's almost like a satellite support group. So the groupings are student initiated. So hopefully that will they feel a little bit happier with that. And so this is how it might look like. So the tutors, they do play a slightly important role because they will be the one who is inducing conversations and cross-pollination. And but in this context, it is not about a group work and a teamwork where they are sharing a common deliverable. This is when they are doing their own individual designs. So, but this moment allows them to understand that there are discourses to be had and dialogues to be had at the heart of architecture. So there isn't any one canon that fixes all problems. So the conversation aspect has to, the tutor have to consciously reduce and taper down along the semester. So that in view that the students will lead their own reviews and criticism and the tutors takes a backseat. So this image was taken at the tail end of the semester where the students are planning their presentation board. So this is not a choreographed post shot. So this is taken in the middle of their discussion when I realized that they are really on their own. So because they know one another's project very well, so they're helping that dude in the middle, trying to figure out what could be the best way of organizing their presentation board. So 4 main ideas I'll quickly run through. So in this particular framework, it is a hybrid model in which they are presenting formally, but they are sitting down. Because if they are standing up having a pin-up creed, the atmosphere tends to be a little bit formal. So when they're all seated down, it creates a more relaxed environment where ideas are being shared. So the one main characteristic is that the queuing list is being removed. So there's no more queues. And the way we engage the students, we are talking about understanding the processes, and we praise the effort. We don't praise the end product. We don't bring the person into the picture. So hopefully through that sense of engagement, we are able to build up their academic resilience, as well as to normalize failures that is part of an everyday affair in the design studio. So the tutors will also be taking on a very neutral role, almost like a facilitator. So he's the one that guides and support rather than directs and controls. So the main key feature is that induced cross-pollination. So the tutors will need to frequently ask questions without dispensing a lot of answers. So it is much akin to a ground-up way of pedagogy rather than the traditional top-down means of teaching. So the students' reflection after being in these systems are quite encouraging because some of them say that they are able to keep pace with one another in the class. They're able to hear the different opinions with regards to my design from my classmates. The best of all, they are very glad that there's no more queuing system. One aspect that I really wanted to understand is student attrition. It has always been an interesting question because for our course, even as popular as it is, we still get up to 10% of attrition. So I've tried to understand why. So when I'm doing exit interviews with the students, much of them attributed to their learning experiences. They will often say that, you know, my tutors are imposing some of the ideas on me where I wanted to explore in this direction. They push me into this direction. But interestingly enough, the percentages of students leaving the course still remains as 10%. But if you can see from this slide, is that most of them, they do belong to the one-on-one group rather than the collaborative team learning group. And so when I asked them about the learning experience, predictably, they said that they hated the queuing list. And they have feedback saying that the learning environment was very stressful because it was very individualistic. Everybody do not want to discuss their work, and it became very competitive. It's almost like very secretive. Compared to the collaborative team learning mode of teaching, there is this friendly environment where the students help one another. And but it is really about that free exchange of criticism that is happening without the fear of offending their peers. So one of our students, she has written a very moving feedback, because she says that, you know, when spending time cracking her brains for her classmates' projects, she has unconsciously thought of and found solutions for her own. So these students end up as our top graduating student a couple of years ago. So some reflective findings. This studio, the collaborative team learning studios, their performance are observed to be better than the one-on-one students. And they have also reflected that they have learned how to communicate and how to negotiate, you know, all of the soft skills that they can develop. And of course, with challenges time is always a problem, because we needed to develop this relationship with them. And it is not about one semester. So we are talking about 2 semesters, the entire academic year. So it's only towards the tail end of first semester. And you could see that the students are opening up a little bit more. They are more comfortable with insulting one another. So this is when you could start to see that the mechanism is starting to be oily. But this cross-pollination will somehow lose its strength when there's a rush to meet up with the deadline. And of course, the last one is faculty alignment, when there's a shift a shift in the dominant paradigm. So that's pretty hard to talk about it. I have to do a shameless plug over here. So I'll be presenting a paper at the end of the month, which will talk about the statistics differences between the performance of both groups, as well as in an attempt to measure how well they have developed this collaborative mindset. So that's going to happen at the end of the year, at end of the month, and registration is free. So it's good for them. Just to end off, just to talk a little bit about this, is that the various ideas that we have discussed moments ago, with all of these interventions, they are not meant to be understood as a framework that fits all, but rather it should be an ongoing pedagogical discourse that you know we should be, and all of these questions that we should be asking ourselves if we wanted to think about moving forward. So thanks so much for putting up with me. I'd like to hear from you guys. So I don't pretend that I have all of the answers. So maybe you could illuminate and to enlighten me on some of the blind spots that I may be having. Thanks very much.
Cool thing. Thank you very much for that. That was really interesting. Again, as I've said before, I think there's a lot of synergies between the approach that you've just described and what we do at the Open University in terms of distance learning. We can maybe have a chat about that in just a minute. But thank you very much. So, Francesca, did you want to jump in, and please feel free to open up a discussion as well. We're more than
thank you very much for the presentation. I think it's super interesting for me. Okay, I introduce myself a bit. So I'm a PhD student at Politecnico di Milano, and my research, it's really, I would say, pretty much related with what you're doing, because I'm working on culturally plural teams in design studio courses, let's say, or project-based pedagogy. And I think I found many analogies with what you are presenting, and also some issues you somehow highlighted are the same I'm struggling with. And I think there's something I would be very interested to know. So at the moment, what I'm finding out, I'm doing more qualitative research involving a network, European network of schools, and to see how they kind of like propose collaborative learning in the environment. And what I'm finding out is that actually most of them are proposing types of collaborations for students, but really there's no preparation, I would say, in any case. So what I'm doing since 3 years is to propose in my school some kind of like preparation for teamwork, which I found out to be very useful for students. But still I have a big issue I'm not totally solving. That is the one about evaluation and assessment. So I think that, and also what you said about the, let's say, historical models for design studios, that made sense. Like you evaluate in terms of me as the master, what do I think is correct and what do I think it's not correct, and that's it. It's easy in a way. But when it comes to evaluate students, also in the way they're able to make their own choices and so on, so you really have to evaluate the process rather than the outcome. And my system, like Italian system, is kind of strict on this, so we really have to give grades at the end. So how can you do it? Like, do you have ideas?
I think to have a solid rubric is the first step. Solid rubric. And for our schools, we tend to break down the design process into stages. So we have the schematic stage and the design development stage. And in some cases, that the percentage that is allocated for the final review is lesser than the process. So with that, we are sending a signal to the students, say that, hey, the processes are important. We wanted to know how did you get to the design, but not to show us your final outcome. So I thought that may be one, but a solid rubric is always the first place to start.
I agree. I totally agree.
I would back that up as well. I mean, we teach at a distance, Francesca, which is completely different to many other design schools, and we're exactly the same. We assess process rather than product. Arguably, we assess too much process compared to product in some ways. I think one of the challenges of doing the assessment of process is still, as a good tutor, what you're wanting to do, or as a good assessor, or as a good feedback, you need that feedback loop to work such that students can connect why their process didn't lead to good output or why it led to good output, you know, and how you can actually connect those two things. That becomes really important. So there's loads and loads and loads of tools that we use, lots of tricks, lots of things. And as Ping is suggesting, having the framework, the signals that, no, this is what we want you to spend time on, this is what we value, is really important. And a lot of design schools do not do that. And that is a bit of a tradition in Italy as well, definitely, no doubt about it, and in some of the architecture schools in the UK, whereby it doesn't matter how you get to where you get to. Now, there's a school of argument that you could say, well, maybe that is the case, that it doesn't matter how you get to where you get to, but that totally ignores your responsibility in terms of looking after the young minds of your students, the mental health consequences of that, and all the other stuff. And I think it is possible to do both. And I think we get paid a lot of money to do both. It's one of our specialisms, one of our superpowers.
I totally agree.
So have the framework. I think also, I know it sounds really boring and dull, but all of the little things like the brief, the instructions for your assessment, what it is that students have to hand in. If you're saying we value this, but then you don't actually get students to produce stuff that supports that, like sketchbooks, like intern sort of stuff, or if it just focuses on one thing, that can set up a discordance, you know, a contradiction in students' minds. And the other big thing is all the little things that tutors do. Like Ping, you mentioned questions. I'm going to ask about this generally a little bit later on, but it's that notion of the tutor as the facilitator. So it's not you saying that this is good work, it's asking questions of the student to say, do you think your work could be better? And every time you see a student asking themselves that question, you should reward that behaviour, if you see what I mean. It's almost like you're looking out for the bits that are going to automatically generate improvement, because you've seen it in yourself, because you've seen it in thousands of other students, I suppose. So yeah, I don't know if that helps at all. But
I think it was useful. I mean, I'm also doing, like, for example, last week, actually, I was trying to give feedbacks about this. So how do I see you when I give you a feedback? So this is my feedback, you know, for the student. Like, I'm seeing you in the way you react, in the way you also listen and include what I'm saying, still being able to make your own choices, which is my aim at the end of the day. It's not that you follow my ideas, that you are able to understand your project and see what's relevant for your project and what's not, probably. And I think this worked very well. So they understood that my feedback was about the way I saw them in reacting to feedback. So it's like inception of feedbacks, but I think it worked.
Maybe I could, sorry, just on that, I wonder if I could pull you back in on that thing, because it's that notion of, it's not saying this is wrong or this is right. That's not your function anymore. That's not what you're describing, Ping. What you're talking about is, I think, is it Webster, Merriam-Webster? Miriam? She refers to
Webster?
the three types of studio tutor, the kind of the dictator, I can't remember what the second one is, but the third one is the liminal servant. So it's that idea of the person who is supportive of the individual needs of the student, the support of the particular individual needs. What are the things that you do, Ping, to do that? I mean, you mentioned questions, for example. We use questions a lot. We don't say this is right or this is wrong. We ask, do you think this could have been better? You know, these kind of really horrible questions that you hate to get as a student. What are the things that you do? And maybe yourself as well, Francesca, what sort of tricks or things do you do to bring that out in students, bring out their capacities, not just their stuff?
For me, I don't think you're going to enjoy my answer. I'll get my students to ask themselves questions. Because when they're at a common level of their, so when they ask themselves questions, they are at a common level which they might be able to answer it. So that's one. So this is when I talk about, sometimes in the studio, the tutors do get pretty tired. So this is when we take a step back and we'll just say, what do you think about his design? What do you think about her design? The other thing that I used to do a few years ago is that whenever there's an awkward silence, I will tell the whole group to say, okay, let's do a model that could probably solve her problem. So the entire group will be working on the same problem. And the person whose work is being discussed ends up being almost like the one who is going to choose the designs. So this is how I try to alleviate the kind of responsibilities of the tutors, so that the decisions are really made in a very communal way. Because sometimes when the student goes for a review, and it happened to me once or twice, you know, the other crit panel will say, why have you designed a butterfly roof? And then the student say, oh, because Ping asked me to design a butterfly roof. So this is when I realized that when we don't make decisions for them and let the whole group collectively have their say, and they're able to bounce off the good and the bads of the design. So hopefully that will trigger some of their thoughts and hopefully sensitivities in their design.
Okay,
That's
cool.
interesting.
Francesca, did you want to?
Yeah, yeah. Have to say, even related to my PhD, what I'm really asking to students is to reflect on their teamwork. So probably it's a bit different structure because we really have teams working on a project.
Well, is that worth then picking up on? Because one of the things that you did mention, Francesca, and I completely agree with you on this, and the literature, and both the research and also the teaching stuff on teamwork is appalling, and there are massive gaps. I come from a practice background. I'm sorry to everybody that's heard this before. I keep telling this story. I've had 15 years as an architect, and I've only engaged in proper collaboration as a professional architect once in my life. The rest of it was a series of different types of working together. Collaboration that's the gold standard, if you want to think of it. That's where people are working over on top of each other. They're actually doing the jobs of other professionals in an overlapped way. You're actually toothing everything together. Then you've got other sort of stages before that. You've got cooperation, you've got coordination, and you've also got coincidence. There's all these levels of working together. And to link these two ideas together, I would suggest would be some of the research that we've been doing in virtual studios. We find that our students start by coincidence, by just realizing that they are in the same space as other students, that those students are doing the same thing as them. Therefore, if they look at what other students are doing, there's a way that they could actually estimate where they're actually. So that, if you like, informal, it's actually it's a social learning mechanism, a really simple one. And then we build on that to get them to actually act on it or to actually say something about it. And that way they'll start then maybe cooperating or even coordinating. But at no time are we assessing their group work. We're still assessing. That's what I liked about your model as well, Ping. You said quite firmly that you are still, the students were doing individual work as a team. Yeah. That's really, really, really important, because in education, we have a competitive system. We have a system that says there's the top position and there's the bottom position, and everybody's going to be mostly ranked according to that. And it's sick, absolutely sick, that we say we're going to rank you all, but you're going to work together.
Yeah.
It just makes no sense to me at all. So, but anyway,
I think that's a big, in my opinion, it's a big topic. So at the moment, because of my research, what's emerging, it's this balance between competitive and cooperative environment, which is, I mean, okay, I will tell you about my situation, like my university, because it's easier. So in our university, we have classes of, let's say, 60 students. So we need to have team. I'm saying this, but I never said it. No, but it's how it is. Like, we have to have teamwork because we cannot deal with those numbers. That's a situation. So we have big classes and we have a lot of students, and therefore teamwork, it's very much used in education also because it's necessary to deal with these huge numbers, which makes some completely sense. On the other hand, I think it really allows to have projects that can go beyond also in terms of complexity. So you really are part of a bigger project, which is also what you in the end will do in your future profession. So it also makes sense. The thing is that sometimes we evaluate them based on the, again, on the output, and we evaluate them in terms of team. So at the end, what really counts is who are you working with and how you're working with these people. And sometimes there are because there is no guidance sometimes on this, they really learn to work together in a way that it's, in my opinion, not very effective or inclusive, if you want. So for example, between teams, there are big competition. It's a huge competition. So people work like this, not showing what they're doing. When what we are trying to say now, it's guys, you're all working on, let's say, the same brief. So in this class, you have the major experts in that area of our school, let's say. We are for sure way more expert in this than the professors and the tutors. So you should help each other in order to find the best solution for everybody, because the aim of the course is not that you got the maximum grade and you got the lowest grade, but it's that all of you made amazing projects and you are happy with them, and you have a nice project to put in your portfolio and you have learned about design and you have learned something. So like switching also the objective from getting a grade at the end of the day or learning something. But of course, then you have years and years of being into a system where the grade is the most important thing. So it's not that easy to make this shift happen. So I don't know if I answered the question, but I'm really struggling with this.
Yeah, but the whole idea with grades is a dominant paradigm that it is impossible for us to shake away from. That's how I felt, because well, in my context, they are highly competitive, and so this is something that we are struggling with since the beginning of time, I guess, at least in our context. So even with that, I don't know if there's any solution to that.
I don't know if there's a solution. Again, that it's something that I spend a lot of time sort of working on and thinking about, particularly what you've described, Francesca. So there's a couple of papers that I've written about how you can actually do both of these things at the same time. Now, I'm not suggesting that it's absolutely perfect, but the problem is that nobody's being honest enough to try and look at that and actually ask, between these systems of competition and trying to develop competency, how do we actually engage a type of pedagogy that actually is helpful to students to do both of those things? I think you personally think you can. So I'll take your 60 students and I'll raise it. We have 1,000 students in our first year entry thing. And the whole point about what I'm saying here is that because we're designed from that premise, from that starting point, we then set up a whole pedagogical system. All the structures, all the systems, all the ways that we have of operating allows us to systemize what can be scaled up and keeps human what can't be scaled up. And that's the absolute key, I personally think, to this. So we still have a tutorial model, a 1:20 sort of proportion, so that you can get that one-to-one sort of tuition. But we don't do that. This is one of the biggest differences that we have, Ping, compared to your studio. We don't have that tuition happening, 5 or 6 times a week on a constant basis. Our students are far more independent. They depend, if you like, on the social studio, on the other sort of learning that they take from students. So when they come for that moment of tuition, when they have that bit of assessment, we actually use it as assessment as well as tuition. It becomes very valuable. And that's one of the key points. And that's the point at which you have to have a knowledge of what the student has done. That's where you're assessing the process, so that the student can actually say, well, this is what I could have done better, and I need to make that, and actually then sort of follow up the loops. So I do think that there are ways that we can do this, but it's not easy. There's no doubt about it. And it's particularly not easy as well, Francesca, I have to say, if you're in an existing educational paradigm. One of the ways that we get away with this, as I say, we're the open university. So, 50 years ago, we were a brand new university. Nobody knew how to do this. It was, we could make up our own rules. And that's a very different, context as well.
Yeah, for sure. That's also something that changes a lot.
Yep.
Like a big university with a mindset. And also, I really think that your analysis being on the on also history of pedagogy in our subjects was very appropriate. Like this was for me like, okay, it's clear where do we come from, and it's clear that it's still there a lot.
Absolutely. Not everywhere though. I think that there are. I think there are certain studios that are getting better. There are definitely certain studios in the world, and you even mentioned a few of them, Ping, that are still absolutely like that, totally like that you are coming here to see this person, that person's behaviour is either brilliant or it's absolutely appalling. Nobody cares whether it's one of those two things, it's that person, and you have that experience. But I think there's a lot of other studios that aren't quite like that. There's far more about what you're doing, Ping, than a few others. And I think there's a far more awareness and interest. There's a lot of very critical architecture lecturers out there. at some point we should maybe actually get them all together in a conference. Actually, that would be quite a bloody good thing to do, because I was quite surprised at a recent conversation we had on studio pedagogy, just how prevalent this still was. I thought we'd actually got rid of this. When I was in studio way back in the 1990s, a long time ago, there was almost like a split. You could see that the old style, if you like, of authoritarian, this is how you do architecture, you'll repeat it, was moving out, and there was a new shift. There was a new set of tutors came in, and I must admit, I thought that kind of just happened everywhere, but maybe not.
I have another question, if I might ask.
Go for it, absolutely.
Because the other point of my PhD is about cultural plurality, and I think, I mean, I have to tell that this started especially because of my personal experience, because I've been doing some like summer school and then internship in Japan, in Kyoto. And actually, like, I found out very hard to work with students there, because I found myself like not able to even understand the context in which I was. And then I kind of like, you know, raised these, like, something clicked in my mind, and I said, okay, so what are we doing with people incoming in our system? So we don't really like take into account that much that there are different learning styles, different ways of working together, and no one knows about this. Like, no one, the students do not care about this. Professors, most of the time, unfortunately, not really see this. And I think it's very interesting that you said, for example, in our case, we have a highly competitive, highly hierarchical system. So also you kind of like design this pedagogy for your own context, knowing it and knowing, let's say, your students and your cultural background. But I'm really trying to find ways to do this in culturally plural environments. So how can we, this is a very open question, how can we make some like more inclusive ways to do all this stuff? So also to involve students, engage them in active learning, ask them for feedbacks, and if you have ideas about this.
I think time is always the best ingredient. To observe them is also good, to observe their body language. But I realized that it is all about relationships. Once they are in a trusting environment and you have a good relationship with them, the chances of them opening up to have a flattened hierarchical kind of conversation, I think should be increased. I do reckon that to begin with. But like what I said just now, time is always a problem. and for the studio that I've presented just now, it is a year-long studio. So there is that runway for us to build up relationship. There's one thing I've forgotten to mention, is that my students don't stick with me for the entire duration. So we have studios on Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So I only see my own students for Monday and Thursday. So on Wednesday, me and my colleague, we switch classes so that we no longer have this perceived to be Master and Apprentice means of relationship, so that the students are exposed to other opinions as well. So that's what I've forgotten to say. But relationships, I think, is very important. So that takes a fair bit amount of time to invest in it. I don't know if I've answered the question, but I've tried.
I totally agree.
There's another irony about this as well. Again, it goes back to another conversation we've been having recently on studio pedagogy with international researchers on this.
These guys is very similar to architecture, yeah.
Oh, sorry, Ping, you were breaking up there. Sorry, what was that? Hi, Ping, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm breaking up. Can I be disconnected for a while? I need one in a while.
I think. Are you back again, Francesca?
Yes.
Cool. Excellent. Cool. Yeah, we'll blame Zoom on that one. Are you still there,
I
Ping?
lost you.
Okay.
No.
Am I back?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Sorry for that, man.
Sorry.
I think Zoom
Oh
might be
my
having issues.
God.
If the three of us are having issues, then that's a bit
Am
weird.
I still breaking up? Am I all right?
You're still breaking up a little bit. Still okay.
That's the.
Okay. Well, the only other thing I was going to add to that was the work of Joss Wynne might be worth looking at. It's less about sort of cultural studios, but it touches on an issue of studios being places for potential plurality, and some of her work engaging alternative communities and different communities in studio is really, really, really interesting, because you've got this kind of theoretical thing that the studio was this blank canvas. And what Joss has found is if you don't bring your own predispositions and your own sort of prejudices, if you like, of culture, because that's basically what we're doing, or what the authoritarian model does too. It doesn't just say, these are the buildings you will produce. It's, this is the way you will behave. For example, Mr. Frank, this is the way you will comport yourself. This is the way you go about things. It's as much a social behaviour, a political behaviour, or an economic behaviour, behavioural model as it is anything else. And that, by the way, is also inherited from the Beaux-Arts tradition and from the Atelier, by the way. But what Joss found was that if you de-emphasize that, or if you bring in other cultures or other different people into the studio, then the studio automatically adjusts to take in on board those if they're allowed to express themselves. So you've got this opportunity for the studio to be a deeply, deeply plural thing, a really, really representative thing in so many ways, but we never ever take those opportunities to do that. We almost like say, these are the behaviours we expect, rather than saying, here's an open space, what behaviours might emerge, or what behaviours can you bring to it? We don't, we do the other thing. And that can be hard to negotiate. But again, there's so many studies that show, if, as Ping says, if you take the time, if you allow time and space for those behaviours or those things to emerge, that you can get completely different studios. I'd love to see more experiments along those lines. I'll tell you that right now.
For example, I'm working on very much on self-reflection and self-peer and group evaluation on this aspect, and I'm trying to make them more inclusive and cultural sensitive. So, for example, not using words and using abstract kind of representation of experiences.
Because that's one of the key tricks that we use in our scaling up model, is a whole bunch of self-reflection, but we try not to make it, now write about what you've learned, because that's boring. We try to do it in kind of other clever ways. So that's be interesting to hear what you're working on with that, Francesca.
Yes, the thing, it's like working with words. Sometimes it's talking, it's not, it's unfortunately, it's the best way to probably interact with others. But even if you're not speaking your mother tongue, maybe you don't feel comfortable, and
totally, absolutely,
it's not easy to find the words sometimes even. So
absolutely. And if you're talking about even neurodiversity, for example, again, one of the things that we've found a lot of colleagues have found moving to an online environment is students that would be unlikely to contribute in a physical social setting are now contributing in a digital setting, because they feel they can control their mode of communication. There are introverts, there are extroverts, there are people with autism, right through to a whole bunch of other neurodiverse sort of conditions. So yeah, absolutely. And right, okay, cool.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, Ping, is there anything else that you wanted to finish up on, Ping?
No, it's just a very quick note to Francesca. I've sent the link on the chat. You may want to take a look. It is called the Spark Plus. So this is one approach in which our school is currently tapping on. So it talks about assessment within a group scenario. So it's also about peer rating. So apparently they have a system in which the mechanisms of it ensures a fairer outcome. So maybe you might want to check on that.
I will definitely take a look to it. And yeah, I'm now publishing this research I'm working on, and also if you want, like, I think I followed already you on academia and LinkedIn, so in case I will publish it there. And what's your name? Because I see only Design Research Society and I've lost your name.
Sorry, Francesca, I'm Derek Jones. I'll type it in.
Okay, thank you. So I will definitely, thank you very much, Derek. So I will definitely follow you and keep you posted if you, I mean, have insights also, and me as well. Let's definitely talk.
Yeah, no, definitely.
I'm looking for reviews and suggestions, so I'm totally open.
Cool, brilliant. Okay, well, Ping, thank you very much for your time there. Is there anything else that you wanted to add, just to sum up, or in closing, Ping?
Probably nothing much. Okay. If I were to add on something, the discussion will end up for half an hour on.
No, it was good. It was a good chat. No, it'd be good to, and as I say, it'd be good to push this even further. As I say, we see quite a complex social model emerging in our online and distance studios, but what we haven't done yet, and what I don't think many people are doing yet properly, is have a deep enough or a subtle enough understanding of just how important and deep those kind of learning mechanisms are in both online and distance and in physical studios as well, just how important the social really actually is, I personally think. So anyway, thank you very much to both of you for coming along, and thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation and for the insightful discussion.
Absolutely, and
Hope to see you.
I'll make the recording available as always, Ping, and thank you very much for your support and everything.
Hope to see you next time.
Okay, see you all later.
See you.
So, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.